Picture this. It's 1971, and President Richard Nixon appears on television to make a stunning announcement that would forever alter the global economy. In a decisive move on August 15th, Nixon ends the Bretton Woods system by severing the final link between the US dollar and gold. The financial world holds its breath as the last vestiges of the gold standard vanish. This wasn't just a policy change. It was the beginning of a new monetary era, one where money itself would be fundamentally redefined. What happened next would challenge centuries of economic thinking and eventually give rise to what we now call modern monetary theory, or MMT. Today, we're diving into this controversial economic framework that has captivated policymakers, enraged traditional economists, and possibly holds answers to some of our most pressing economic challenges. From Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to leading economists, MMT has sparked fierce debates about the very nature of money, debt, and government spending. Money is something we use every day, yet few of us understand its true nature. Is it just a means of exchange, a store of value, or is it something else entirely? Modern monetary theory offers a radical perspective. Money is fundamentally a creation of the state, and understanding this changes everything about how we should approach economic policy. Modern monetary theory emerged gradually through the 20th century, but found its formal shape in the 1990s, primarily through the work of economists like Warren Mosler, L. Randall Wray, and Stephanie Kelton. Its intellectual roots, however, reach back to earlier economic thinkers who challenged conventional wisdom about currency and state finance. In 1924, economist Georg Friedrich Knapp published The State Theory of Money, arguing that money derives its value not from precious metals but from government decree, what he called chartalism. Later, during the Great Depression, economist Abba Lerner developed the concept of functional finance, suggesting that government fiscal policy should be judged by its results rather than traditional accounting principles. But MMT truly began to crystallize in 1993 when Warren Mosler, a successful hedge fund manager turned economist, published his paper, Soft Currency Economics. Mosler's experience in financial markets led him to insights about monetary operations that contradicted mainstream economic thinking. In 1996, he collaborated with academic economists to further develop these ideas, and MMT was born as a coherent school of thought. At its core, modern monetary theory makes a bold assertion. A government that issues its own currency can never run out of money. Think about it. The U.S. government doesn't need to find dollars. It creates them. According to MMT proponents, this fundamentally changes how we should think about government spending, taxation, and debt. As Stephanie Kelton, former chief economist for the Senate Budget Committee and author of The Deficit Myth, explains, the federal government is the issuer of our currency. That means that Congress has the power to spend money into existence. This simple observation has profound implications. In the traditional view, governments collect taxes to fund spending. But MMT flips this relationship. Governments issue currency through spending and then collect some back through taxation. As MMT economist Randall Wray put it in a 2019 congressional testimony, taxes aren't needed to pay for government spending, but rather to create demand for the government's currency. This reversal of the conventional understanding leads to MMT's most controversial claim. Government deficits aren't inherently problematic. In fact, they're often necessary for economic health. To understand why, let's look at a historical example. During the Great Depression, U.S. unemployment reached 25%. Traditional economic thinking suggested balanced budgets, but this approach failed catastrophically. It wasn't until massive government spending during World War II, creating deficits of over 25% of GDP by 1943, that the economy recovered. Unemployment fell to 1.2% by 1944, demonstrating how government spending could stimulate economic activity. MMT theorists point to this period as evidence that government spending, not balanced budgets, is what matters during economic downturns. The real constraint on spending isn't running out of money, it's inflation. When President Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933, he immediately began implementing unprecedented deficit spending through the New Deal. Critics warned of bankruptcy and financial ruin. Yet these dire predictions never materialized. Instead, the economy began to recover. MMT explains this by noting that government deficits became private sector surpluses, providing the financial resources for economic growth. The relationship between public and private sectors is critical to understanding MMT. As economist Win Godley demonstrated through his sectoral balance approach in the 1990s, when the government runs a deficit, the private sector must run a surplus of equal size. This mathematical reality means that government deficits are not just beneficial, but necessary for private sector savings to grow. Bill Mitchell, one of MMT's founding scholars from Australia, observed this dynamic during the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Countries that allowed their deficits to expand recovered more quickly than those that imposed austerity measures. In his 1998 paper analyzing the crisis, Mitchell wrote, "The obsession with budget surpluses is damaging. A budget deficit is required to maintain growth and full employment. But if governments can create money at will, why tax at all?" Here, MMT offers several reasons. Taxes create demand for the currency, manage inflation by removing money from circulation, and can redistribute wealth or discourage harmful behaviors like pollution. Taxation serves these crucial functions rather than primarily funding government activities. In 2011, during contentious debates over the U.S. debt ceiling, former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan made a surprising statement that aligned with MMT thinking. "The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that." This candid admission from a mainstream figure highlighted one of MMT's central insights.
Do you like to dig deeper? Political economy is full of powerful ideas. You're right in the thick of it. Insightful, thought-provoking, expanding every step of the way. From Adam Smith and the rise of capitalism to Marx's bold critique, mercantilism, Keynesian economics, neoliberalism, and more. Or we explore it all, clearly and from every angle. Keep the momentum going. Check the links, dive deeper, and subscribe for more.
But MMT isn't just theoretical, it has practical applications. Japan offers perhaps the most compelling real-world case study. Since the 1990s, Japan has run substantial deficits, accumulating government debt exceeding 250% of GDP, far higher than levels economists once considered sustainable. According to conventional economic theory, Japan should have experienced hyperinflation and economic collapse. Instead, Japan has struggled with deflation, not inflation. Despite massive government borrowing, interest rates have remained near zero for decades. MMT economists like Stephanie Kelton point to Japan as evidence that debt-to-GDP ratios aren't meaningful constraints for currency-issuing governments. In a 2017 interview, Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe seemed to acknowledge MMT principles when he stated, "Japan has the capacity to issue government bonds in its own currency. We will never face the same problems as countries that cannot issue government bonds denominated in their own currencies." The 2008 financial crisis and its aftermath marked another critical moment for MMT. As governments around the world engaged in quantitative easing, creating trillions of dollars, euros, and pounds to purchase financial assets, conventional economists warned of imminent inflation. These predictions failed to materialize, lending credibility to MMT's view that money creation alone doesn't cause inflation. During congressional testimony in 2019, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell was asked about MMT and responded, "The idea that deficits don't matter for countries that can borrow in their own currency is just wrong." Yet, when pressed on whether the U.S. could technically pay any obligation, he conceded, "We can always print the money to do that." This tension between technical reality and economic orthodoxy highlights the controversial nature of MMT. While many mainstream economists reject MMT, they often struggle to articulate exactly why its central observations about monetary operations are incorrect. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 further validated key MMT insights. Governments worldwide rapidly increased spending by trillions of dollars without facing immediate financial constraints. In the U.S., Congress authorized multiple stimulus packages totaling over $5 trillion. This dramatic expansion of spending didn't trigger the bond market collapse many traditional economists had long warned about. As Stephanie Kelton noted during this period, "We've just witnessed MMT being rolled out in real time without policymakers even realizing it." The pandemic response demonstrated that, when necessary, governments can mobilize tremendous financial resources without being constrained by traditional notions of affordability. But MMT isn't without critics. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has called it fallacious at multiple levels, arguing that it underestimates inflation risks. Nobel laureate Paul Krugman, while sympathetic to some MMT ideas, has criticized what he sees as its tendency to downplay monetary policy's importance. Perhaps the most substantive critique comes from historical examples of hyperinflation, like Weimar Germany in the 1920s or Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Critics argue these cases prove that government money creation can indeed lead to economic disaster. MMT proponents counter that these examples involved specific circumstances, war reparations, supply shocks, or currency collapses, that don't invalidate MMT's core principles for functioning economies. What makes MMT particularly relevant today is its implications for pressing policy challenges. Climate change, infrastructure decay, healthcare costs, and inequality all require substantial resources. MMT suggests that the question shouldn't be, "How will we pay for it?" but rather, "Do we have the real resources, labor, materials, skills, to accomplish these goals without causing inflation?" As economist Pavlina Cherneva, who has worked extensively on MMT and employment policy, stated in her 2020 book, The Case for a Job Guarantee, "We live in a world of real resource constraints, not financial ones. The question is not whether we can afford full employment, but whether we can afford the massive costs of unemployment." Interestingly, some central bankers have acknowledged elements of MMT in practice, if not by name. In 2020, Neil Kashkari, president of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, stated, "There is no formula that tells us how much is too much. We're just going to have to watch and see." This pragmatic approach aligns with MMT's emphasis on real economic indicators rather than arbitrary financial targets. Even critics of MMT, like former New York Federal Reserve President William Dudley, have conceded key points. In a 2019 Bloomberg opinion piece, he wrote, "It's true that countries that borrow in their own currencies and have independent central banks need never default on their debt." He then pivoted to inflation concerns, which MMT itself recognizes as the genuine constraint. As we look to the future, MMT's influence continues to grow. When Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez mentioned MMT in 2019 as a potential way to think about funding climate initiatives, it catapulted the theory into mainstream political discourse. Since then, MMT ideas have increasingly found their way into policy discussions, from universal health care to educational access. The true test of MMT may come as governments navigate the post-pandemic economy. With debt levels reaching historical highs, conventional thinking would suggest a period of austerity is necessary. MMT offers an alternative path, continued investment in public priorities, with taxation and spending adjusted to manage inflation rather than to balance the budget. As Warren Mosler, one of MMT's founders, put it, "The government doesn't need our money, we need their money." This simple statement encapsulates MMT's radical reframing of fiscal policy. Whether you find modern monetary theory compelling or concerning, it has undeniably changed the conversation about economics. It challenges us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about money, government, and society's capacity to address collective challenges. The debate it has sparked forces us to question whether the economic constraints we perceive are real or simply self-imposed limitations based on outdated understanding. As we face mounting global challenges, from climate change to inequality, the question of how we mobilize resources becomes increasingly urgent. MMT suggests that the financial capacity to address these challenges already exists. What we lack is not money, but political will. In the words of Stephanie Kelton, we can afford what we can do. This simple yet profound insight may prove to be MMT's most lasting contribution to economic thought. A reminder that in a world of fiat currency, our constraints are primarily about real resources and political choices, not abstract financial limits. Understanding modern monetary theory gives us a new lens through which to view economic possibilities and public policy. Whether it ultimately reshapes mainstream economics or remains an influential heterodox perspective, MMT has already succeeded in expanding the boundaries of what many consider economically possible.
We've got some amazing content coming your way. Subscribe now so you're first in line for fresh insights and all the good stuff you won't want to miss.